energy and infrastructure which may still, to a large extent, be driven by fossil fuels. This is quite possible and quite real, and frankly, it has to be what we do. Because we cannot keep going up 2 ppm a year for the next 150 years. This is the trajectory we are on, and even holding that rise constant requires fast changes in our energy infrastructure. So it's absolutely necessary that we focus on carbon capture and storage, on managing the carbon cycle. And I think there's no way around that. And it is feasible and possible.
Yeah, if we leave carbon capture and storage, carbon sequestration to one side as a technology, because I think most of us would accept that that is a very sensible technology to use. Putting that to one side, are there any other geoengineering solutions that you feel have a commercial potential, Professor Caldieri, which ultimately might drive this science?
I think there are potential areas of research where there can be co-benefits. I mean, one example, this might also sound as far out as climate engineering, but a number of people are looking at the potential for extracting wind energy from high-altitude winds, where the wind is much stronger and blows more steadily. And one of the big challenges of that is maintaining a tethered platform at altitude. Yeah. And this could not only affect high-altitude wind power, but if you're going to disperse particles up high, you'd like a platform there. Also, if you'd like to recharge, electrically powered surveillance planes, you might want a platform up there also. And so there might be, say, research into maintaining high-altitude platforms that could have co-benefits, where climate engineering would be one of the benefits. I would like to take the opportunity to comment on your one point about the lack of enthusiasm here. And I think that thoughtful people are not enthusiastic about climate engineering, that thoughtful people would like us to see deep reductions in carbon dioxide emissions and see those reductions soon. And it's really a certain sense of despair that we're not seeing those cuts come as quickly that's pushing us to consider these things. And I really look at Klaus's proposals as a form of carbon capture and storage. And personally, I would not classify what Klaus Lackner is researching as geoengineering.
Okay. Ian Stewart.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Ian Stewart. There are bodies like the Tyndall Centre who argue that attention needs to be paid to the phasing in of schemes in relation to geoengineering, running alongside other abatement measures. As I understand it, Professor Salter, amongst others, has argued that it may even be too late to deploy geoengineering technologies in line with this. Bearing that in mind, can you say whether we still should go ahead with the development of geoengineering schemes? If so, do we have the skills in the undergraduates and graduates that would allow us to do that?
You start, Professor Lackner, in the States. In your view, do we have the skills to be able to develop these technologies?
If your question is restricted to manipulating the climate, I don't think we have the skills to do this today. We should learn about it, and we should have it ready in case we need it. But I would very much view that as an effort of last resort. We cannot solve the problem. We cannot stop the CO2 from accumulating by changing the climate. And I would argue this is such a complex system that you really do not want to do that unless you really have no choice left. If the glaciers in Iceland are falling into the ocean, maybe you have no choice. But you should not think of this as the way you stabilize the system. And that, in a way, answers your previous question. I don't expect people to make money off the fire department, so I really don't expect people to make money of those kind of geoengineering efforts.
Okay. Professor Salter, do we have the skills?
I think the most urgent thing is to try to save the Arctic ice cover, because if we lose that, we've now got another very large input of warming coming in from the sun. So I think that is particularly urgent. The ice is vanishing much more quickly than the first studies of climate change predicted. It really is going frighteningly fast. It is also possible that if we get very large amounts of methane released from the seabeds in the Arctic and also from the permafrost, that they could take over from carbon dioxide as the main driver for global warming, and then it wouldn't matter how much carbon we reduced, we would still have a climate change problem. So I would rather have it available too early than too late.
To address the moral hazard issue from before, I think it's not clear what is the ethical course of action. If we did find that the sea ice is melting and threatening polar bears and Arctic ecosystems with extinction, and that Greenland is sliding into the sea, is it better to say, well, let's have that ecosystem go extinct and let's lose Greenland, and that will be a good motivator for people to reduce emissions? Or do you say, no, we actually care about these ecosystems, we care about Greenland, and maybe we should put some dust in the stratosphere to prevent this from happening while we're working on reducing emissions? And I don't think the ethical and moral high ground is necessarily to say, let's allow environmental destruction to proceed unimpeded while we're trying to reduce emissions.
Professor Caldera, then let's take this example that Professor Salter has given and you've carried on with. If we were to address that issue, how long would it take us to develop the geoengineering, and how much would it cost? Does anybody have any idea?
Nobody really knows, but the estimates in terms of cost are, on the order, within, say, a factor of 10 of $1 billion a year. And it's the low cost, I'm thinking now of a dust in the stratosphere scheme, and it's the low cost of this that makes it somewhat frightening, because it might be so cheap that people might want to do it because it's cheap and easy. That I think that within a few years we could start getting the stuff up there using airplanes or artillery shells or something, while lower cost strategies are developed. So I think it is something that could be deployed at relatively low cost and relatively quickly. And the question is, are there unanticipated damage or even anticipated damage that doing that will create? And so it's important to do the research up front, so that if you do find that there are environmental consequences of global warming that you would like to prevent using these approaches, that you're not just creating bigger problems. And that's why we need the research.
Finally, is there, can you carry on with that, but also can you all be thinking, my last question is there a technology that seems to hold the most promise in relation to these matters?
I just wanted to come back to the point that Professor Caldera made, that really what we need to be concentrating on is removing the greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, whether that's by reducing emissions or removing them artificially. Those really are the key to solving the problem. And I just wanted to come back to the point about the climate engineering, so actually trying to alter the climate to compensate. And of course, there's the question of unintended consequences. But many of the changes that we're talking about are temporary. So if we put aerosol into the troposphere, for example, to seed clouds, it only stays in the atmosphere for a couple of weeks. So you have to keep putting more aerosol in. If you put aerosol in the stratosphere, it stays much longer, perhaps for a couple of years, but you still have to keep putting the aerosol in. When you put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it stays around for hundreds of years. So if you're going to use geoengineering as a solution, you've actually got to keep doing it for hundreds of years, because as soon as you stop doing it, the warming goes up again. And so either you have to decrease the emissions much more quickly, or you have to put up with even higher warming. So you've got to bear that in mind as well in looking at the consequences.
We're asking you to stargaze now in terms of which of the geoengineering techniques which have been mooted so far, if you were a government minister, would you be urging resources to be put into? You have a new president, Ken, so what are you going to ask him to do?
First of all, if I was the new president, I would be putting a small fraction of my total effort in climate engineering, first of all. But within that effort, I think that the putting small dust particles in the stratosphere seems to be the most promising and cost-effective approach. And I would also put some resources into looking at the sorts of things that Steve Salter has been talking about. But I would also be hesitant to pick winners at an early stage. And I think it's important to fund a broad diversity, a wide portfolio of research options, and not think that we have already thought of the best approach